85 million years ago, North America was split in half by an ocean, not a narrow channel, not a temporary floodplain, a warm inland sea stretching from the Arctic all the way to the Gulf of Mexico, wider than the modern Mediterranean in some regions, alive with predators at every depth. Plesiosaurs with necks longer than buses moved through the upper water column. Sharks the size of small boats patrolled beneath them. Enormous predatory fish hunted in schools, dense enough to darken the water, and somehow all of them eventually lost dominance to a creature that was never supposed to be there at all. Mosasaurus was not a dinosaur. It was not born in the ocean. It was a lizard, a land animal descended from the same ancient lineage that would eventually produce monitor lizards and Komodo dragons. Its ancestors lived near shorelines, hunting in shallow coastal water, small enough to become prey themselves. And yet within only a few million years, that same lineage transformed into something up to 17 meters long and weighing as much as a loaded school bus, something built with 2 rows of teeth, one set lining the jaws, another set growing from the roof of the mouth itself, angled backward so that once prey entered, escape became almost impossible. The ocean Mosasaurus entered was already one of the deadliest ecosystems Earth had ever produced. Apex predators already occupied every major niche. The hierarchy was established long before mosasaurs arrived, but then the hierarchy changed. Mosasaurs spread through every ocean on the planet. Fossils have been found across North America, Europe, Africa, Asia, South America, and even Antarctica. For nearly 25 million years, they ruled seas that no longer exist. Then, in what amounts to a geological instant, they vanished alongside the rest of the Late Cretaceous world. No descendants remained, no surviving branch returned to shore, nothing alive today carries their lineage forward. But before we start, let me know in the comments if you have any topic suggestions you would like me to cover in future videos. Now let's go back to the shoreline where this story actually begins, because Mosasaurus did not enter the ocean as a ruler, it entered as prey. Long before grass-covered continents or ice sealed the poles, the planet moved through an age of water and heat. During the Late Cretaceous, between roughly 166 million years ago, Earth carried a different shape beneath its clouds. The oceans stood far higher than they do now, swallowing coastlines and spreading inland across entire continents. Forests reached toward polar latitudes, where snow never settled permanently, and warm rain drifted across seas that shimmered beneath a heavier atmosphere. Average global temperatures rested several degrees above modern levels, and no frozen caps existed to lock water away at the ends of the world. Across the center of North America, an immense inland sea slowly breathed between 2 young mountain systems. Paleontologists call it the Western Interior Seaway. At its greatest extent, it stretched nearly from the Arctic Ocean to the Gulf of Mexico, dividing the continent into eastern and western landmasses for millions of years. In some regions, this sea approached 970 kilometers in width and descended to depths near 800 meters, though much of it remained shallow enough for sunlight to penetrate far below the surface. This watery world was not isolated. Similar tropical seas spread across what would one day become Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, and large portions of Asia. Continental shelves lay drowned beneath warm salt water, creating broad marine habitats rich in nutrients and life. Ocean currents moved slowly through these shallow basins, carrying heat around the globe and feeding ecosystems of extraordinary density. The water column itself formed a layered realm of hunters and drifting prey. Near the surface, long-bodied marine reptiles glided through open water with measured strokes of their flippers. Elasmosaurus moved among them, its neck extending so far ahead of its body that the skull seemed to float separately in the sea. Some individuals reached more than 14 meters in length, though much of that size belonged to the impossible chain of vertebrae supporting the neck alone. Farther below, giant fish crossed the dimmer middle depths. Ziphectinus, built like a living spear of muscle and bone, could exceed 6 meters in length. Fossils later revealed entire prey animals preserved inside its rib cage, swallowed whole in violent bursts of feeding. Schools of smaller fish moved around these predators in shifting silver clouds, feeding on plankton blooms nourished by the unusually productive Cretaceous ocean. Along the seafloor, ammonites drifted and hovered in staggering variety. Some measured only a few centimeters across, delicate coils no larger than coins. Others grew wide enough to rival compact automobiles, their chambered shells ribbed and spiraled like carved stone lanterns, sinking through green water. Crustaceans, mollusks, and dense mats of marine invertebrates covered the sediment beneath them. The chemistry of this world encouraged gigantism almost everywhere. Warm temperatures accelerated metabolism, while elevated oxygen availability and immense food abundance sustained bodies on a scale rarely seen afterward. Even the reptiles carried dimensions that would seem improbable in the modern sea. Archelon, the largest sea turtle known, drifted through coastal currents with a shell spanning nearly 5 meters. Sharks patrolled deeper channels with jaws broad enough to shear through bone. And already, before Mosasaurus rose to dominance, another giant mosasaur had entered the scene. Tylosaurus moved through the western interior seaway as an established predator, stretching up to 14 meters long with a narrow skull designed for powerful strikes. It hunted in waters already crowded with specialists, competitors, and scavengers. Nothing in this ocean waited empty for a new ruler. Every depth contained something searching for food, defending territory, or avoiding becoming food itself. The Cretaceous Sea was already full, balanced atop ancient pressures that had shaped its inhabitants for millions of years before the first great mosasaurs began to spread through the world's waters. Along the shorelines of the ancient Tethys Sea, where warm tides folded gently against limestone coasts, small reptiles moved through mangrove roots and tidal shallows. They were narrow-bodied animals with quick limbs and long tails, no larger than modern monitor lizards. Their world existed between land and water, among estuaries rich with fish, crustaceans, and soft-bodied prey, stirred loose by the current. Nothing in their appearance suggested the immense marine predators their descendants would become. These early members of the Mosasauridae family belonged to a lineage that still survives in altered form today. Deep within the skeleton of Mosasaurus, paleontologists found structures shared with monitor lizards and Komodo dragons, from the shape of the jaw joints to the arrangement of certain skull bones. Later molecular analysis of preserved proteins supported the same relationship, tying the great marine reptiles of the Cretaceous to agile terrestrial hunters that still flick their tongues through tropical forests and dry island scrublands. One of the clearest windows into this transition appeared in Texas, preserved in rock, dating to roughly 92 million years ago. The animal became known as Dallosaurus turneri. At only about 1 meter in length, it stood far closer to its terrestrial ancestors than to the giant oceanic forms that would follow. Its limbs remained fully developed, complete with weight-bearing joints, capable of supporting movement across land. Yet the skeleton also carried subtle hints of another life beginning to emerge. The bones were denser than those of fully terrestrial reptiles, useful for controlling buoyancy in shallow coastal water. Dallosaurus likely spent much of its life hunting near the shoreline. Fish, squid, and smaller marine animals moved through tidal flats, where the reptile could wait partially submerged before lunging forward with rapid strikes. Fossil evidence suggests these early mosasaurs still returned to land regularly, perhaps to rest, thermoregulate, or avoid larger marine predators offshore. In behavior, they may have resembled modern saltwater crocodiles, creatures equally comfortable sliding between riverbank and surf. Over millions of years, the fossil record begins to show a slow reshaping of the body itself. Limbs shortened and broadened, the flexible toes gradually stiffening into paddle-like structures more suited for steering than walking. Vertebrae near the tail changed form as stronger muscle attachments developed, supporting a downward tail lobe that generated propulsion through side-to-side motion. The nostrils migrated farther back along the skull, reducing the need to raise the head completely above water while breathing. Bone by bone, generation by generation, the shoreline released its hold. This transformation did not produce a single uniform creature. Mosasauridae expanded into an extraordinary range of forms occupying different ecological roles across the Cretaceous seas. Some species remained relatively small, sleek hunters only a few meters long, feeding on fish in coastal environments. Others developed blunt crushing teeth designed for shellfish and armored prey. A few lineages grew steadily larger until they reached dimensions rivaling the greatest marine predators in Earth's history. What remains striking is the speed of this expansion. In geological terms, the transition happened with unusual rapidity. Within roughly 25 million years, a group of shoreline reptiles evolved into globally distributed ocean predators, adapted to shallow estuaries, open seas, and even colder northern waters. Paleontologists still debate what forces accelerated this evolutionary surge so dramatically. The oceans of the Late Cretaceous offered opportunity, but opportunity alone rarely reshapes life at such pace. Somewhere within those ancient waters, conditions aligned with extraordinary precision. A lineage once vulnerable along tidal margins began changing faster than the normal rhythm of deep time, as though the sea itself had briefly opened a path waiting to be filled. Far beneath the surface of the Cretaceous ocean, the water began to lose its breath. The change unfolded slowly enough that no living creature could perceive the whole of it. Deep currents weakened. Layers of warm surface water settled across the sea like a lid, preventing oxygen from circulating downward into the dark. Along the sea floor, life that depended on steady oxygen exchange entered a long collapse. Sediments from this period still carry the signature of that suffocation, thin black layers rich in organic material that decayed without fully breaking apart. Paleontologists now call this interval the Cenomanian-Turonian oceanic anoxic event. It began roughly 93 million years ago and ranks among the most severe marine disruptions of the Mesozoic era. The trigger appears to have originated far from the animals drifting through those ancient seas. Across what is now the Caribbean region, colossal volcanic eruptions spread lava across the ocean floor in repeated pulses over immense stretches of time. These eruptions formed the Caribbean Large Igneous Province, releasing extraordinary quantities of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. As greenhouse gases accumulated, ocean temperatures climbed. Warm water carries less dissolved oxygen than cold water, and the increasingly stratified seas became hostile to animals adapted for deep, oxygen-rich environments. Entire portions of the ocean floor transformed into expanding dead zones where little larger life could survive. The chemistry of the sea itself shifted beneath the bodies of the creatures living within it. Among the most significant casualties were the ichthyosaurs. For nearly 150 million years, these dolphin-shaped marine reptiles had occupied many of the ocean's highest predatory niches. Some species possessed enormous eyes adapted for deep diving, while others cruised through open water with remarkable efficiency. Yet by the close of the anoxic event, they vanished entirely from the fossil record. No known ichthyosaur lineage survived beyond this interval. Other marine predators endured heavy losses. Pluvisiosaurs declined in both diversity and abundance, their once varied forms reduced to fewer surviving branches. Large predatory fish populations also contracted sharply as oxygen stress and ecological instability spread upward through the food chain. In many marine ecosystems, the established hierarchy that had governed the ocean for millions of years fractured within a relatively brief geological window. The coastal ancestors of mosasaurs occupied a different position within this upheaval. Living primarily in shallower water near shorelines, they existed in regions where wave action and atmospheric mixing maintained higher oxygen levels. Their ecological habits placed them slightly outside the zones most devastated by deep water collapse. While larger marine specialists disappeared or declined, these semi-aquatic reptiles persisted along coastlines and shallow continental shelves. Survival alone did not explain what followed. The ocean suddenly contained vacant territory on a scale rarely available in evolutionary history. Open hunting grounds extended across marine environments once dominated by established apex predators. Large prey animals remained, but many of the competitors capable of controlling those resources had disappeared. Within the next 5 million years, mosasaurs underwent an extraordinary adaptive radiation. Species diversified rapidly, each lineage exploring different ecological opportunities newly available in the recovering seas. Some evolved streamlined bodies suited for pursuit hunting in open water. Others specialized in crushing shelled prey or feeding at different depths. Body size increased generation by generation, producing forms far larger than their shoreline ancestors. The fossil record preserves this transformation with unusual clarity. Earlier mosasaurs appear comparatively modest beside the immense marine reptiles emerging later in the Cretaceous. Skeletons lengthen, skulls enlarge, tails strengthen, and entire ecosystems reorganize around the expanding presence of the mosasaur die. The ocean did not gradually welcome mosasaurs through peaceful expansion. A catastrophe reshaped the marine world first. Ancient rulers disappeared into oxygen-starved water, and in the silence left behind, another lineage moved outward from the coasts and found room enough to become enormous. By the final chapters of the Cretaceous, Mosasaurus hoffmanni no longer resembled the shoreline reptiles from which its lineage began. The body had become something dense with muscle and momentum, shaped not for beaches or estuaries, but for long movement through open water. Adult individuals could reach lengths approaching 17 meters and weigh as much as 15 tons. The skull alone stretched to nearly 1.5 meters, suspended at the front of the body like the prow of a living vessel. The jaws carried one of the most unusual feeding structures in the marine world of the time. Rather than forming a rigid hinge at the center, the lower jaw remained loosely connected through flexible tissue in a condition known as cranial kinesis. Modern snakes retain a similar arrangement. When Mosasaurus seized large prey, the mouth could widen beyond what the skull initially seemed capable of accommodating, allowing the animal to work struggling bodies deeper inward through alternating movements of the jaws. Inside the mouth, another mechanism waited farther back along the palate. Rows of pterygoid teeth angled toward the throat like hooked needles set into bone. Once prey passed beyond the front teeth, escape became extraordinarily difficult. Any backward movement only pressed flesh more firmly against the rear-facing points. Fossil skulls preserve these structures with unnerving clarity, giving the interior of the mouth the appearance of layered traps folding inward. The eyes faced slightly forward and were supported internally by hardened rings of bone called sclerotic rings. These structures stabilize the eyeball under pressure and low light conditions, suggesting vision adapted for dim environments beneath the brighter upper water. The placement of the eyes also provided overlapping fields of view, useful for judging distance during pursuit. Movement came primarily from the tail. In 2013, exceptionally preserved soft tissue fossils from Kansas revealed that Mosasaurus possessed a crescent-shaped tail fluke resembling that of a shark. Earlier reconstructions had often depicted mosasaurs moving with long eel-like undulations, but the fossil evidence showed something faster and more efficient. The rear half of the body generated powerful lateral thrust, while the front remained comparatively stable, allowing quick acceleration through open water. The skin covering this body bore small diamond-shaped scales packed closely together. Fossil impressions show a texture neither smooth like a dolphin nor heavily armored like certain terrestrial reptiles. The scales formed a flexible outer surface that reduced drag while preserving mobility. Protection seemed secondary to speed and maneuverability. Even at full marine adaptation, Mosasaurus remained bound to the surface in one important way. It was still a reptile breathing atmospheric air. Large lungs filled within the chest cavity, requiring regular returns upward from deeper hunting zones. This created a rhythm of ascent and descent through the water column, a biological tether between predator and sky. Any extended pursuit into great depth unfolded beneath the quiet limit imposed by breath itself. The limbs had transformed almost completely into flippers, though their ancestry remained visible beneath the surface anatomy. Inside the rigid paddles lay the familiar arrangement of lizard forearms, radius and ulna, leading into 5 digits enclosed by connective tissue. These limbs no longer supported weight on land. Instead, they acted as steering structures, stabilizing the animal during turns and rapid directional changes. Recent isotopic analysis of mosasaur bones added another layer to this portrait. Chemical signatures within the fossilized tissue suggest Mosasaurus may have maintained body temperatures somewhat higher than the surrounding sea. Rather than functioning as a fully cold-blooded reptile, it may have occupied an intermediate metabolic state, retaining internal warmth through elevated activity and physiological regulation. Such an adaptation would have allowed longer hunting periods in cooler water where slower reptiles became sluggish. Every feature within the body converged toward the same outcome. Mosasaurus was not merely surviving in the ocean. By the end of the Cretaceous, its anatomy had become inseparable from the sea itself, refined into a form built for motion, pressure, and predation across immense distances of water. Sometimes the final meal of a prehistoric animal remained sealed inside its ribs long enough to become stone. Within the fossilized body cavities of mosasaurs, paleontologists have discovered fragments of fish, vertebrae, shark bone, ammonite shell, seabird remains, and pieces of smaller marine reptiles preserved where the stomach once lay. These discoveries transformed Mosasaurus from a silhouette of bone into something more intimate and immediate, an animal whose daily life could still be reconstructed through the debris of digestion. It hunted across nearly every layer of the marine ecosystem and consumed almost anything large enough to justify the expenditure of energy. One fossilized sea turtle tells part of that story with unusual clarity. Archelon, the immense turtle drifting through late Cretaceous waters, carried a shell approaching 5 meters across. On one specimen, researchers identified deep damage matching the spacing and shape of mosasaur teeth. The shell had not been neatly punctured. Instead, it appeared collapsed inward, the bone itself fractured under crushing pressure. The force required for such damage suggests a bite capable of rivaling or exceeding that of a modern saltwater crocodile, among the most powerful living predators known. The structure of the skull supports these estimates. Large muscle attachment regions along the rear of the jaw indicate thick bundles of muscle anchoring into the cranium, generating enormous closing force during feeding. Yet Mosasaurus did not rely solely on strength. The proportions of its body reveal a hunter adapted for sudden acceleration rather than prolonged pursuit. The crescent tail could produce rapid bursts of speed through open water, while the relatively rigid torso stabilized the animal during directional changes. It likely approached prey through controlled stalking before lunging forward in a brief, explosive attack. This method allowed Mosasaurus to target an unusually broad range of animals. Fast-moving fish could be intercepted near the surface, while slower reptiles drifting at depth remained vulnerable to ambush from below or behind. Sharks themselves sometimes became prey. Bite marks on fossil shark bones and mosasaur stomach contents containing shark remains suggest direct predation rather than scavenging alone. Even members of its own family were not exempt. Smaller mosasaur skeletons occasionally preserve tooth marks matching the jaws of larger individuals. Some of these injuries occurred around feeding damage rather than combat wounds, implying cannibalism within the group. In the crowded marine world of the Late Cretaceous, hunger appears to have overridden any distinction between competitor and kin. Ammonites, protected by tightly coiled shells, reinforced through millions of years of evolution, also fell within the feeding range of Mosasaurus. Certain fossil shells contain circular punctures and fracture patterns corresponding closely to mosasaur dentition. Few marine predators of the period possessed jaws powerful enough to break through those armored spirals. Mosasaurus carried both the force and the dental structure necessary to crack them apart. Because it hunted so many kinds of prey across different habitats, Mosasaurus functioned as a generalist apex predator rather than a narrow specialist. It could move between coastal shelves, deeper offshore waters, and mid-level hunting zones depending on prey availability. This flexibility made the animal especially effective within unstable ecosystems where food sources shifted through seasons and environmental changes. As mosasaurs expanded across global oceans, their feeding pressure altered entire marine communities. Paleontologists describe this process as a trophic cascade, a chain reaction moving downward through the food web. Predators influence which herbivores or mid-level hunters survive in greatest numbers, and those changes ripple outward into countless smaller interactions. In regions dominated by large mosasaurs, prey populations reorganized around the constant threat of predation. Certain species declined, while others diversified into new defensive strategies or ecological niches. The ocean did not merely contain Mosasaurus. Over time, the presence of the animal began reshaping the structure of marine life around it, pressing invisible weight through the ecosystem with every hunt. Predators crossed paths constantly in the late Cretaceous sea, though most encounters left no trace behind them. A shadow passing beneath another shadow vanished into open water without witness or memory. Only occasionally did violence settle into sediment deeply enough to survive tens of millions of years. Among the largest rivals, moving through the western interior, seaway was Tylosaurus, a close relative of Mosasaurus that could approach 14 meters in length. Its body was elongated and muscular, ending in a narrow skull built for rapid strikes. Fossils suggest it hunted a broad range of prey, including fish, birds, turtles, and other marine reptiles. In many parts of North America, Tylosaurus occupied ecological territory remarkably similar to that later dominated by Mosasaurus itself. The two giant mosasaurs likely competed directly wherever their ranges overlapped, pursuing the same large-bodied prey through shared hunting grounds. Elsewhere in the water column drifted Elasmosaurus, whose anatomy seemed almost detached from ordinary proportions. The neck alone contained 72 vertebrae and extended nearly 7 meters before reaching the small head at its tip. Rather than competing through brute force, Elasmosaurus occupied a different feeding niche. Its long neck allowed careful movement through schools of fish without disturbing the water around its larger body. By hunting smaller prey in shallower or differently layered regions of the sea, it avoided constant direct conflict with the faster and more heavily armed mosasaurs. The giant fish Xiphaxtinus moved through these ecosystems with a different kind of danger. Reaching lengths near 6 meters, it possessed a massive underbite, lined with sharp teeth angled for gripping slippery prey. One famous fossil preserves the outline of a 1.8-meter fish, still lodged inside its stomach cavity. The prey appears to have been swallowed whole shortly before the predator itself died, perhaps from internal injury or suffocation caused by the oversized meal. Even among the violent feeding pressures of the Cretaceous ocean, excess carried consequences. Beneath all of them cruised Chicxulub, a large shark stretching to approximately 7 meters. Its serrated teeth cut through flesh and bone with such efficiency that paleontologists later nicknamed it the Ginsu shark. Unlike the bulkier mosasaurs, Chicxulub retained the streamlined precision of open-water sharks, capable of swift directional movement and sustained pursuit. Fossil evidence shows it fed upon mosasaurs regularly, especially younger individuals, lacking the immense size of mature adults. One specimen preserves this conflict with unusual intimacy. A vertebra belonging to Tylosaurus contains embedded Chicxulub teeth still lodged within healed bone. The injuries closed over during the animal's life, proving the mosasaur survived the attack. At some point in the ancient sea, shark and reptile collided violently enough to leave fragments of one predator inside the body of the other, after which both continued living beneath the same waters. Mosasaurs gradually gained advantages difficult for most competitors to counter. Compared to sharks, the largest forms possessed greater overall mass and stronger crushing power. Compared to long-necked plesiosaurs, they carried superior acceleration and broader feeding strategies. They could seize prey near the surface, pursue animals through open water, scavenge carcasses, or break apart armored organisms few predators could exploit efficiently. As mosasaurs diversified and increased in size through the Late Cretaceous, a broader ecological pattern emerged across multiple fossil formations. Regions rich in large mosasaur remains often show declining diversity among giant predatory sharks. Smaller shark species persisted by occupying narrower feeding niches, but many large-bodied forms became increasingly rare. The ocean remained crowded with hunters until the very end of the Cretaceous. Yet over time the balance shifted subtly toward the mosasaurs, not because other predators vanished immediately, but because one lineage proved capable of moving through more parts of the ecosystem than almost anything beside it. In the open ocean, visibility dissolves quickly. Light fades with depth, currents scatter sound, and bodies disappear into suspended clouds of drifting particles long before they move beyond striking distance. For a predator living within such space, survival depended not on a single sense, but on the merging of many. The skull of Mosasaurus preserves one of the clearest clues to how it interpreted the water around it. Along the roof of the mouth lay structures associated with Jacobson's organ. a chemosensory system still present in snakes and monitor lizards today. These animals gather microscopic chemical particles by flicking a forked tongue through air or water, then transferring those particles into specialized sensory chambers within the palate. Fossil evidence suggests mosasaurs possessed both the forked tongue and the internal anatomy necessary for the same behavior. In practical terms, this meant the ocean carried information directly into the predator's mouth. Traces of blood, waste, skin oils, or disturbed sediment drifted through currents invisible to the eye but chemically detectable across large distances. A wounded fish passing hours earlier could leave behind a dissolving trail of molecules. Another mosasaur moving through nearby water might announce its presence long before becoming visible. This chemical awareness worked alongside unusually refined hearing for a marine reptile. Analysis of the inner ear bones shows adaptations suited for sensing low-frequency vibration traveling through water. Modern crocodilians use similar structures to detect movement beyond visual range, perceiving disturbances created by struggling prey or approaching animals. In Mosasaurus, the same capability likely extended across vast three-dimensional hunting environments, where sound traveled farther than light. The eyes themselves reveal another layer of adaptation. All known mosasaurs possessed hardened sclerotic rings embedded within the eyeball, supporting the eye under changing pressure and maintaining shape in dim conditions. Large eye size, combined with these bony reinforcements, suggests excellent vision during low-light hunting, possibly at depth or during twilight hours, when many marine animals rise toward surface waters. Rather than depending on bright daylight, Mosasaurus appears to have operated effectively across shifting levels of visibility. Inside the skull cavity, paleontologists reconstructed portions of the brain through endocasts formed naturally during fossilization. These reconstructions revealed proportionally enlarged olfactory bulbs, the regions associated with processing scent-related information. The brain devoted substantial neurological space to interpreting chemical signals carried through water, reinforcing the idea that smell functioned as a central component of mosasaur predation. Some researchers have proposed an additional sensory system, still more subtle. Certain pits and channels preserved along mosasaur skull bones resemble structures associated with pressure detection in aquatic animals. Fish possess a lateral line running along the body that senses tiny shifts in water movement caused by nearby organisms. Crocodilians use pressure-sensitive receptors around the jaws to detect ripples at the surface. Whether mosasaurs retained a comparable system remains debated, yet the anatomical hints persist within several fossil specimens. If present, such sensitivity would have allowed Mosasaurus to perceive disturbances produced by swimming prey, even without direct contact or visibility. A sudden acceleration nearby, a rapid turn through dense water, or the panicked vibrations of an injured animal could all register across the sensory surface of the body. Together, these systems formed a predator deeply integrated into its environment. Mosasaurus did not simply react to motion appearing in front of it. It interpreted chemical gradients, pressure shifts, vibration patterns, and low-light visual cues simultaneously while moving through immense volumes of water. The ocean became less an empty space than a layered field of signals continuously unfolding around the animal. Within that sensory world, prey rarely vanished completely. Even in darkness or distance, movement left traces behind, and Mosasaurus evolved to follow them through the sea with quiet precision. For much of paleontological history, the beginning of a mosasaur's life remained hidden behind silence in the fossil record. Skeletons of adults appeared across ancient seabeds in remarkable abundance, yet the question of reproduction lingered unresolved for more than a century. The bones revealed how Mosasaurus hunted, swam, and fed, but not how new generations entered the world. Early researchers assumed the answer must resemble that of modern sea turtles. Large marine reptiles, they reasoned, would eventually return to shore to lay eggs upon beaches before slipping back into the sea. The idea carried a certain familiarity, linking mosasaurs to a reproductive strategy already visible in living oceans. Yet, decade after decade, the evidence failed to appear. No confirmed mosasaur nest was uncovered. No eggshells emerged from coastal sediments. Across more than 200 years of fossil collecting, the shorelines of the Cretaceous remained strangely empty of any trace of mosasaur breeding activity. The absence itself slowly became meaningful. In 2014, a study published in the journal Paleontology described very small mosasaur remains discovered within open ocean deposits far from ancient coastlines. These individuals were interpreted as neonates, animals young enough to have been recently born. Their presence in deep marine sediments suggested something profoundly different from the earlier assumptions. Rather than crawling onto land to reproduce, mosasaurs likely gave birth directly within the sea. This mode of reproduction, known as viviparity, survives today among sharks, whales, and several marine reptiles. The developing young remain inside the mother's body until birth, emerging fully formed into open water. Evidence from adult mosasaur skeletons supports this interpretation. Their flippers had become highly specialized steering structures incapable of supporting the animal's immense weight on land. The joints lacked the flexibility and strength necessary for hauling a multi-ton body across a beach. By the time Mosasaurus reached its largest forms, the connection to terrestrial reproduction may already have disappeared entirely. Body cavity fossils from related mosasaurs suggest litter sizes between roughly 4 and 10 offspring at a time. Compared with fish releasing millions of drifting eggs, this represented a far slower reproductive strategy, more consistent with long-lived apex predators investing heavily in fewer young. Each neonate entered the ocean already large enough to swim independently, though still vulnerable within a marine ecosystem crowded by predators. The danger began immediately. Adult mosasaurs themselves likely posed a threat to juveniles. Fossil distributions reveal a striking pattern in which very young mosasaurs appear predominantly within shallow coastal deposits rather than deeper offshore sediments associated with mature individuals. Paleontologists interpret these regions as nursery habitats, protected near-shore environments where juveniles could feed on smaller prey while avoiding the larger predators patrolling open water. Within these calmer coastal zones, young mosasaurs probably spent the earliest years of life developing the strength and size necessary to move outward into deeper marine territory. Their world differed sharply from that of the adults. Instead of giant turtles and marine reptiles, juvenile prey may have included fish schools, squid, and smaller invertebrates hidden among reefs and submerged estuaries. The reproductive strategy of Mosasaurus marked a final severing of ancestral ties to land. Earlier, members of the lineage still moved between shore and water, carrying the memory of terrestrial life within their bodies. But live birth in the open ocean changed the rhythm entirely. New generations no longer required beaches, nesting grounds, or protected coastlines to continue the species. Birth, growth, hunting, and death could all unfold without touching land even once. By the late Cretaceous, the transition had become complete. The shoreline that once shaped the earliest mosasaurs no longer held any necessary place within the life cycle of their descendants. The sea itself had become cradle, hunting ground, and home Deep beneath the city of Maastricht in the 18th century, miners carved blocks of pale chalk from tunnels that had once rested under a vanished sea. Within those walls of compressed marine sediment, workers uncovered an enormous skull unlike anything recognized at the time. The fossil emerged in 1764 from the limestone quarries of the Netherlands, long before paleontology existed as a formal science. Some believed it belonged to a giant fish. Others argued for a crocodile. The idea that an entirely unknown kind of animal had disappeared from Earth was still difficult for many naturalists to accept. The skull eventually reached the attention of Georges Cuvier in Paris. By 1808, after careful anatomical study, Cuvier concluded that the specimen represented a giant marine lizard, unlike any living species. His analysis became one of the earliest major demonstrations that extinction was real, not merely a failure to discover surviving populations somewhere beyond the known world. Fossils were no longer viewed as curiosities or imperfect copies of living creatures. They became evidence of entire ecosystems erased by time. The specimen itself had already passed through history in unusual ways. During the French Revolutionary Wars, French forces captured Maastricht in 1795. Among the objects specifically demanded during the negotiations was the great fossil skull. According to historical accounts, soldiers offered large quantities of wine in exchange for information leading to its recovery after it had been hidden from occupying forces. The fossil was transported to Paris as war bounty and entered the collections that would later shape early vertebrate paleontology. As scientific exploration expanded into North America during the 19th century, far richer deposits began to emerge. The chalk beds of Kansas, formed at the bottom of the ancient inland sea that once divided the continent, preserved extraordinary numbers of marine fossils. The Niobrara Chalk Formation yielded hundreds of mosasaur specimens ranging from juveniles to giant adults. Entire skeletons appeared articulated within the rock, their bones lying almost exactly where they settled on the sea floor tens of millions of years earlier. Some of these fossils preserved far more than bone alone. Skin impressions survived in delicate detail, revealing the shape and arrangement of scales across the body. In rare cases, outlines of internal organs and preserved stomach contents remained visible inside the rib cage. These exceptional specimens transformed mosasaurs from skeletal frameworks into biological organisms whose diet, movement, and anatomy could be reconstructed with remarkable precision. Modern techniques deepened that understanding still further. By analyzing oxygen and carbon isotopes trapped within mosasaur tooth enamel, researchers began extracting chemical records from the animals themselves. These isotopic signatures revealed patterns linked to water temperature, migration behavior, and metabolism. Variations in oxygen isotopes suggested some individuals spent time in cooler waters than expected for typical reptiles, supporting the growing evidence for elevated internal body temperatures. The original Maastricht fossil eventually became the type specimen for Mosasaurus hoffmanni. The genus name referred to the Meuse River region where the skull was discovered, while the species honored Hoffmann, the physician and collector associated with the specimen's early history. From that single skull emerged an entire lineage now recognized across the globe. Today, mosasaur fossils have been recovered from every continent, including Antarctica. Their remains appear in Europe, Africa, Asia, North and South America, New Zealand, and polar deposits formed under ancient southern seas. This distribution confirms that mosasaurs were not regional curiosities confined to one basin or coastline. They became globally established apex predators occupying marine ecosystems across the planet. Yet, even with hundreds of specimens and centuries of study, the fossil record remains incomplete by its nature. Soft tissues decay quickly. Behavior rarely fossilizes at all. Much of what is understood about mosasaur movement, reproduction, and ecology comes from careful inference built around surviving evidence rather than direct observation. Paleontology moves slowly through fragments, assembling entire worlds from scattered pieces of mineralized memory left buried beneath stone. The continents of the Late Cretaceous sat lower beneath the sea than they do today. Water flooded across continental margins and pooled inland through broad, shallow basins, linking distant coastlines into warm marine corridors that stretched for thousands of kilometers. Through these expanding pathways, mosasaurs moved outward from their ancestral regions until their fossils began appearing almost everywhere the ancient ocean touched. The earliest known mosasaurs remained comparatively restricted in range. Between roughly 92 and 85 million years ago, most fossil evidence places them within the Tethys Sea region and the inland waters crossing North America. Their distribution still reflected the geography of a lineage closely tied to shallow marine environments. Yet the ocean itself was changing continuously during this period. Rising sea levels widened epicontinental seas across Europe, North Africa, Asia, and the southern continents, creating connected habitats that allowed marine predators to disperse between once isolated basins. By around 80 million years ago, mosasaur fossils began appearing far beyond their earlier strongholds. Remains emerged from Europe and the southern shores of the Tethys, then from North Africa and South America as well. The spread unfolded rapidly on geological timescales. Marine reptiles that had once occupied relatively localized environments now crossed enormous portions of the globe through interconnected shallow seas, rich with prey. Different regions fostered different branches of the family. In the Tethyan waters, Prognathodon evolved broad, crushing jaws suited for powerful feeding strategies. North American seas produced forms such as plate carpus, a more streamlined mosasaur adapted for agile pursuit. Across Atlantic basins, Mosasaurus itself expanded widely, eventually becoming one of the most geographically distributed marine predators of the entire Late Cretaceous. Each lineage responded to local prey availability, water conditions, and ecological pressures, diversifying into specialized forms while retaining the core anatomy of the Mosasauridae. What makes this expansion remarkable is its speed. The ichthyosaurs, which once achieved similarly broad marine distribution, required tens of millions of years to spread across the world's oceans. Mosasaurs accomplished comparable global reach in less than 20 million years. Few large vertebrate predator lineages in Earth's history have expanded so quickly across so many marine ecosystems. The fossil record eventually carried them into the southernmost regions of the planet. By 70 million years ago, mosasaur remains had been recovered from every continent, including Antarctica and New Zealand. The Antarctic specimens came from seas that, while warmer than modern polar waters, still experienced prolonged winter darkness and cooler temperatures than tropical regions farther north. Their presence there suggests a physiological flexibility unusual among reptiles of the time. Chemical analysis of mosasaur teeth adds another dimension to this story. Certain isotopic signatures indicate some species regularly descended into waters exceeding 200 meters in depth. This marked a dramatic departure from the coastal habitats inhabited by their distant ancestors. The lineage had expanded not only geographically, but vertically, moving from shallow shoreline systems into truly pelagic environments where the open ocean extended in every direction beneath dim blue light. As mosasaurs penetrated deeper marine zones, they carried predatory pressure into ecosystems once occupied primarily by fish and sharks. Their adaptability allowed them to exploit reefs, offshore basins, continental shelves, and deeper water hunting grounds simultaneously. No single ocean basin remained untouched by their expansion during the final millions of the Cretaceous. By the last 5 million years before the end of the era, mosasaurs had become the dominant marine reptiles across the planet. Their fossils appear repeatedly within major marine formations separated by entire hemispheres, preserving the outline of a lineage that succeeded almost everywhere water permitted movement. Before or since, no other reptile has exercised comparable influence across Earth's oceans on such a global scale. No predator shapes an ecosystem alone. Every improvement in speed, strength, or perception presses outward into the surrounding web of life, altering the bodies of prey generation after generation. In the oceans of the Late Cretaceous, the growing dominance of mosasaurs appears to have triggered a long escalation of defensive adaptations among the animals sharing their waters. The evidence survives most clearly in shell and bone. Ammonites, which drifted through nearly every marine environment of the period, began developing increasingly elaborate shell structures during the later stages of the Cretaceous. Earlier forms often carried smoother spirals, with relatively simple rib patterns. Later species display thicker ridges, reinforced tubercles, and more heavily ornamented surfaces winding across the shell like armored architecture. Paleontologists have proposed that these modifications strengthened the shell against crushing attacks from predators capable of generating immense bite forces. Against smaller hunters, such reinforcement may have offered little advantage, but against the jaws of large mosasaurs, even minor increases in structural resistance could determine survival. Sea turtles reveal a similar pattern. Giant forms such as archelon-possessed shells, proportionally thicker and more robust than many earlier turtle lineages. The timing of this increase overlaps closely with the expansion of large mosasaur diversity across marine ecosystems. Bone tissue within these shells became denser in key regions, distributing impact forces more effectively during attacks. Protection came at a cost, however. Heavier shells reduced agility and demanded greater energy expenditure during swimming. Evolution often moves through compromise rather than perfection. Among fish communities, the changes become more difficult to observe directly because behavior rarely fossilizes. Yet, ecological modeling based on fossil assemblages suggests many late Cretaceous fish species shifted towards smaller body sizes, tighter schooling behavior, and faster reproductive cycles. Dense, coordinated schools create confusion for large pursuit predators, reducing the chance that any single individual becomes isolated. Speed and collective movement may have offered protection in waters increasingly patrolled by highly mobile hunters. Even seabirds carried traces of this pressure within their skeletons. Hesperornithiforms, the flightless diving birds of the Cretaceous seas, developed anatomical features associated with rapid underwater maneuvering. Their hind limbs became powerful steering structures positioned far back along the body, enabling swift directional changes while submerged. Coexisting with giant marine reptiles likely rewarded any improvement in underwater acceleration or escape efficiency. A bird surfacing too slowly or turning too widely could vanish beneath the waterline without leaving anything behind except disturbed sediment. Interestingly, the mosasaurs themselves also diversified in response to these shifting ecological pressures. As some lineages expanded into enormous apex predators, others remained comparatively small and agile. These smaller mosasaurs occupied hunting niches inaccessible to the giants, feeding among reefs, coastal channels, and dense fish populations where maneuverability mattered more than raw size. In this sense, even members of the same family adapted in relation to one another, partitioning the ecosystem into increasingly specialized forms. Paleontologists describe this process as an evolutionary arms race, a long cycle in which predators and prey continuously shape each other through selective pressure. A stronger predator favors tougher armor or faster escape behavior. Improved defenses then favor predators capable of overcoming them. Across geological time, entire ecosystems can become locked within these escalating exchanges. The Late Cretaceous ocean preserves many signs of such escalation. Shells thickened, skeletons shifted, swimming patterns likely changed. Predator diversity expanded alongside prey defenses in a dynamic balance, constantly adjusting itself beneath the sea. Mosasaurus did not exist outside this system as a solitary force imposing control upon passive prey. Its own rise helped drive a broader transformation across marine life, pushing countless species toward new forms of survival. Within the fossil record, these adaptations remain frozen together, predator and prey altering one another slowly across millions of years, each shaping the evolution of the other through the quiet mathematics of survival. The water itself was different then, not merely in shape or geography, but in chemistry, temperature, and the amount of life it could sustain at every depth. The Cretaceous ocean operated under conditions unlike those of the modern world, and those conditions allowed bodies to grow to extraordinary scales. Mosasaurus emerged from an ecosystem already carrying more biological energy than any ocean existing today. Across tropical regions, average sea surface temperatures likely ranged between 30 and 35 degrees Celsius. Modern tropical oceans rarely exceed 27 degrees for long periods without ecological stress, yet the Cretaceous Sea remained persistently warmer on a global scale. Even polar waters stayed relatively mild, free from permanent ice, and capable of supporting complex marine ecosystems year-round. Warm water contains less dissolved oxygen than colder water, a condition that might seem limiting at first glance. Yet for many ectothermic animals, higher temperatures accelerate metabolism and growth rates. Fish matured more quickly, reproductive cycles shortened, and marine reptiles processed energy at faster rates than they could in cooler seas. A predator entering such an environment encountered prey populations growing rapidly and reproducing in immense numbers. The atmosphere above those oceans also contained far greater concentrations of carbon dioxide than modern pre-industrial Earth. Estimates suggest atmospheric carbon dioxide levels ranged from roughly 4 to 8 times higher than those that existed before widespread human industrial activity. Marine algae flourished under these greenhouse conditions. Sunlit waters supported vast plankton blooms, spreading across continental shelves and shallow inland seas. At the base of the marine food web, this productivity multiplied outward through every trophic level. Microscopic plankton fed enormous populations of small invertebrates and larval fish. Those organisms supported dense schools of larger fish and cephalopods. Above them moved marine reptiles, sharks, seabirds, and giant predators, drawing energy upward from the countless smaller lives beneath them. Compared to modern oceans, The late Cretaceous sea contained more biological mass, distributed through nearly every layer of the ecosystem. The evidence remains visible today in stone. The Cretaceous period itself derives its name from the Latin word creta, meaning chalk. The white cliffs of Dover in England and the chalk deposits spread across parts of Kansas formed from the accumulated remains of microscopic algae called coccolithophores. These organisms produced tiny calcium carbonate plates surrounding their cells. Over millions of years, unimaginable numbers of them died and settled to the seafloor, compressing into vast layers of chalk hundreds of meters thick. Entire landscapes visible in the modern world consist partly of ancient marine productivity hardened into rock. Sea level played an equally important role. Because so much water remained outside polar ice caps, shallow continental shelves expanded dramatically around the globe. These sunlit coastal zones are among the most productive habitats in any marine environment, rich in nutrients and biological activity. During the Cretaceous, the total area covered by such shallow seas increased enormously, creating broad feeding grounds capable of sustaining gigantic populations of marine life. For Mosasaurus and its contemporaries, this meant access to ecosystems carrying exceptional energetic capacity. Giant predators required giant food supplies, and the Cretaceous ocean delivered them continuously through overlapping chains of productivity extending across entire continents. The result was not simply a warmer world populated by larger animals. It was an ocean fundamentally structured around abundance. Chemistry, climate, and geography aligned in ways that amplified biological production at nearly every level of the marine system. Under such conditions, bodies could grow heavier, prey could become more numerous, and apex predators could persist at scales difficult for later oceans to support. When paleontologists uncover the immense bones of mosasaurs, turtles, sharks, and giant fish within the same deposits, they are not merely finding oversized animals. They are uncovering evidence of an ocean that carried enough energy to make such giants possible at all. Teeth survive where flesh disappears. Long after cartilage dissolves and muscle vanishes into sediment, shark teeth remain scattered through ancient rock in enormous numbers. Small enamel fragments, preserving traces of encounters that unfolded beneath vanished seas. Because sharks constantly replace their teeth throughout life, the ocean floor of the late Cretaceous became littered with evidence of feeding, injury, and competition. When those teeth appear embedded inside mosasaur bone, the relationship between the two predators becomes unusually clear. During the earlier part of the late Cretaceous, one shark stood near the top of the marine food chain, Chicxulub mantelli, reaching roughly 7 meters in length, moved through open water with a streamlined body and broad, serrated teeth capable of slicing through dense tissue and bone. Its skeleton lacked the massive bulk of later mosasaurs, yet it possessed speed, maneuverability, and a bite powerful enough to attack marine reptiles directly. One fossil from Kansas preserves the outcome of such an encounter. The remains belong to Platecarpus, a smaller mosasaur species living approximately 85 million years ago. Along the bones lie tooth marks matching Chicxulub with striking precision. The injuries show no signs of healing, indicating the mosasaur did not survive the attack. At that stage in the Cretaceous, large sharks still held substantial predatory control within many marine ecosystems. Another shark, Squalocorax, occupied a different role. Smaller than Chicxulub at roughly 5 meters long, it carried serrated teeth suited for cutting flesh from carcasses. Fossil evidence links Squalocorax repeatedly to mosasaur remains, though often in ways suggesting scavenging rather than active predation. Teeth are frequently found near damaged mosasaur skeletons deposited on the seafloor, as though the shark fed opportunistically after death. Whether it regularly attacked healthy adult mosasaurs remains uncertain. As millions of years passed, however, the balance between sharks and mosasaurs began shifting in subtle but measurable ways. Mosasaurs increased steadily in body size, ecological diversity, and geographic spread. Their skulls grew more robust, their feeding strategies more varied, and their overall abundance within marine formations more pronounced. In many of the same rock layers, large predatory shark diversity declined. This pattern appears repeatedly across distant regions rather than within a single local ecosystem. Where giant mosasaurs became common, large shark species often became rarer. Paleontologists interpret this as evidence of competitive exclusion, a process in which two apex predators, occupying similar ecological roles, cannot indefinitely dominate the same resources without one gradually displacing the other. By approximately 72 million years ago, Chicxulub disappeared entirely from the fossil record. Its extinction aligns closely with the period during which mosasaurs reached their greatest diversity and largest body sizes. The timing does not prove direct replacement in a simple sense, yet the overlap remains difficult to ignore. Mosasaurs had become larger, more flexible predators, capable of hunting across a broader range of habitats and prey types than most large sharks could exploit. Sharks did not vanish altogether. Smaller and more maneuverable species continued thriving within ecological spaces less accessible to giant mosasaurs. Reef hunters, scavengers, and fast-moving mid-sized predators persisted by feeding on prey too small or too agile to interest the largest marine reptiles. Competition reshaped the predator guild rather than eliminating it entirely. Evidence of conflict nevertheless continued into the later Cretaceous. Shark teeth embedded in healed mosasaur vertebrae show that attacks still occurred from time to time. Yet such injuries become increasingly uncommon in younger formations, suggesting adult mosasaurs eventually became far more dangerous adversaries than earlier in their evolutionary history. Across the world's ancient marine basins, the broader pattern remained consistent. As mosasaurs expanded toward peak dominance, the great sharks that once ruled alongside them receded gradually into the background of the fossil record, leaving behind scattered teeth as quiet evidence of a rivalry written across millions of years beneath the sea. The giant skulls tend to dominate museum halls. Massive jaws lined with curved teeth, vertebrae broader than a human torso, immense flippers suspended beneath soft light. These are the fossils most often remembered when people imagine mosasaurs. Yet, the family itself was never composed solely of giants. Beneath the shadow of the largest species existed a far wider spectrum of forms, some scarcely larger than modern dolphins, others small enough to move through habitats inaccessible to the ocean's largest hunters. The story of Mosasauridae is therefore not simply the rise of a single apex predator. It is the expansion of an entire lineage into almost every available aquatic environment of the late Cretaceous world. Among the smallest known forms was Dallosaurus turneri, the shoreline hunter whose body measured only around 1 meter in length. Its limbs still retain the structure necessary for movement on land, and its skeleton carried only the earliest signs of marine adaptation. Compared to the colossal mosasaurs appearing later in the fossil record, Dallosaurus seems almost delicate. Yet, within that modest frame, lay the foundation for one of the most successful marine radiations in Earth's history. Other small mosasaurs evolved along very different paths. Carinodons belgicus, discovered in the chalk deposits of Belgium, reached roughly 3 meters long and possessed rounded, blunt teeth, unlike the slicing dentition of larger predators. These teeth functioned as crushing tools, suited for hard-shelled prey such as mollusks and sea urchins. Rather than pursuing large vertebrates through open water, Carinodons occupied a quieter ecological niche close to the seafloor, feeding among reefs and rocky substrates where armored invertebrates gathered. Inland waters also became part of the mosasaur story. Pannoniasaurus, recovered from deposits in Hungary, reveals that some mosasaurs returned from the sea into freshwater rivers and lakes. Measuring approximately 6 meters in length, it inhabited environments entirely separate from the warm coastal oceans usually associated with the group. Fossil sediments surrounding its remains contain freshwater organisms rather than marine species, confirming that certain mosasaurs adapted successfully to inland ecosystems long after their ancestors entered the sea. Platecarpus occupied yet another position within the family's expanding diversity. Roughly 6 meters long and built with a streamlined body, it possessed unusually large eyes relative to skull size. Paleontologists interpret this feature as evidence of hunting in dim conditions, perhaps deeper water or low-light environments beneath the ocean's surface. Some of the most complete mosasaur skeletons ever discovered belong to Platecarpus, preserving details of body shape, soft tissue outlines, and tail structure with remarkable clarity. This variation in body size and behavior carried profound ecological significance. Smaller mosasaurs could move through reef channels, estuaries, and confined coastal habitats impossible for the giants to navigate efficiently. Some specialized in crushing shelled prey. Others hunted fish in shallow water or occupied freshwater systems entirely disconnected from open marine basins. Together, these species expanded the family's reach far beyond the role of apex predator alone. Even within shared ecosystems, mosasaurs appear to have reduced direct competition through subtle separation of habitat. Isotopic analysis of tooth enamel from different species found within the same rock formations reveals distinct oxygen signatures, indicating that they fed in different water masses and at different depths. One species may have hunted near the surface, while another patrolled deeper offshore zones, each drawing resources from separate portions of the same environment. By the final stages of the Cretaceous, Mosasauridae had become something larger than a single evolutionary success. It was an entire network of related predators occupying coastlines, reefs, rivers, shallow inland seas, and open pelagic waters across the globe. The famous giants represented only one branch of that expansion. Beneath them existed a quieter multitude of smaller forms, each contributing to a family that had learned to inhabit nearly every corner of the ancient aquatic world. Far from the warm inland seas and tropical coastlines where mosasaurs first evolved, another ocean waited beneath long polar twilight. The late Cretaceous poles were not frozen wastelands. Antarctica, Greenland, and northern Alaska remained free of permanent ice, their coastlines bordered by cold gray water rather than glaciers. Forests grew in some high-latitude regions, and marine ecosystems persisted through seasons of prolonged darkness. Even so, these were among the harshest environments any mosasaur lineage ever entered. Fossils recovered from Antarctica reveal that they entered them anyway. On Seymour Island, near the Antarctic Peninsula, paleontologists uncovered mosasaur remains within the Lopez de Bertodano Formation, sedimentary layers deposited during the final few million years of the Cretaceous. The bones emerged from ancient seafloor mud laid down near the edge of the southern polar ocean. These deposits preserve evidence, not of temporary visitors, but of marine communities established close to the limits of available sunlight. Water temperatures in these polar regions likely ranged between 12 and 14 degrees Celsius. Compared to modern Antarctic waters, this was relatively mild. Compared to the tropical seas farther north, however, it remained cold enough to impose significant physiological demands on large reptiles. For animals dependent entirely on external heat, prolonged exposure to such temperatures would slow muscle activity, digestion, and reaction speed. This is where the possibility of elevated body temperature becomes increasingly important. Chemical analysis of mosasaur bones and teeth has suggested that at least some species maintained body temperatures above the surrounding water. They may not have been fully warm-blooded in the mammalian sense, yet even partial metabolic heat retention would have offered substantial advantages in colder seas. A predator capable of sustaining faster muscle function and stable internal temperatures could continue hunting efficiently while other reptiles became sluggish. Polar waters introduced another challenge beyond temperature. During winter months, sunlight declined dramatically, reducing visibility across the ocean surface and limiting photosynthetic productivity in shallow water. Food webs likely contracted seasonally as plankton production slowed beneath extended darkness. Hunting under such conditions would have required sensory adaptation, endurance, and the ability to exploit prey over wide distances. The fossil evidence suggests prey remained available despite these constraints. Fish vertebrae, ammonites, and diverse marine invertebrates occur throughout the same Antarctic formations containing mosasaur remains. Even in colder regions, the Cretaceous Sea supported productive ecosystems capable of sustaining large predators year-round. Tooth isotopes provide another remarkable clue. The chemical signatures preserved within some polar mosasaur teeth do not show patterns expected from long seasonal migrations between warm and cold water. Instead, they suggest many individuals remained within high-latitude environments continuously. They did not retreat northward when darkness deepened across the polar sea. They adapted to it and stayed. This represents one of the most extraordinary aspects of mosasaur evolution. A lineage that began among warm coastal shallows expanded within roughly 30 million years into environments near the edges of the habitable world. From inland tropical seas to dim Antarctic waters, mosasaurs repeatedly demonstrated an ability to occupy ecosystems vastly different from those of their ancestors. Their presence in polar deposits also changes the emotional texture of the ancient ocean itself. The Cretaceous Sea was not uniformly bright or warm. In some places, giant marine reptiles moved through cold, dark water beneath months of muted sunlight, hunting among drifting ice-free currents at the edge of the planet. The fossils from Antarctica preserve only fragments of that world, scattered vertebrae and isolated teeth, weathering slowly from stone. Yet together, they reveal the final reach of a family that expanded farther than almost any reptilian lineage before it, carrying its ancient shoreline ancestry into oceans where winter darkness lingered over the sea for months at a time. There came a point near the end of the Cretaceous when the oceans belonged almost entirely to mosasaurs. From roughly 72 to 66 million years ago, their expansion reached its highest expression. Across inland seas, continental shelves, deep offshore basins, and polar waters, mosasaurs occupied nearly every major predatory niche available in the marine world. The family had diversified into more than 40 described species by this stage, ranging from compact shell crushers to immense open-water hunters carrying skulls larger than most human bodies. Among them, Mosasaurus hoffmanni stood near the upper limit of marine reptile size. Confirmed estimates place the species between 14 and 17 meters in length, with bodies weighing many tons and skulls extending well beyond 1 meter. Few marine predators in Earth's history approached such scale. Even within a family already defined by gigantism, Mosasaurus hoffmanni represented an extreme. Yet the significance of this period lies not only in body size, but in abundance. In the Niobrara chalk and Pierre Shale formations of North America, mosasaur fossils occur with striking frequency. Vertebrae, skull fragments, isolated teeth, and nearly complete skeletons appear repeatedly through the sedimentary layers. When paleontologists compare the remains of large marine predators within these formations, mosasaurs account for a greater proportion of large vertebrate biomass than any competing group. They were not occasional apex predators moving through the ecosystem in small numbers. They were among its dominant physical presences. The range of prey available to mature individuals was enormous. Smaller fish, measuring around 1 meter long, moved in dense schools through coastal and offshore waters. Giant turtles, such as Archelon, drifted through the same seas with shells spanning several meters across. Ammonites remained abundant, alongside sharks, diving birds, plesiosaurs, and even other mosasaurs. Few predators in natural history have possessed access to such a broad menu of potential prey while simultaneously occupying so many habitats across the globe. What makes this dominance even more remarkable is its geographic simultaneity. Fossils indicating peak mosasaur diversity and large body size appear across multiple continents during nearly the same slice of geological time. North America, Europe, Africa, South America, Antarctica, and regions of the southern Pacific all preserve evidence of flourishing mosasaur populations near the end of the Cretaceous. Their expansion was not confined to one isolated basin or temporary environmental refuge. It represented a planetary phenomenon unfolding across interconnected oceans. By approximately 70 million years ago, no competing marine predator lineage matched the Mosasauridae in combined size, diversity, and distribution. Large sharks persisted, but many had declined in abundance or occupied narrower ecological roles. Plesiosaurs survived, though generally outside the apex predatory position. The old marine hierarchies that had once constrained mosasaur expansion no longer existed in comparable form. The ocean itself must have appeared stable from within this world. Generation after generation of mosasaurs hunted beneath the same warm seas, while continental coastlines shifted only gradually across immense spans of time. Prey remained abundant. Marine ecosystems continued functioning with apparent permanence. Nothing within ordinary biological experience would have suggested that these dominant reptiles stood only a few million years from total disappearance. This illusion of continuity exists in many ecosystems across Earth's history. When a lineage achieves overwhelming success, its dominance can appear inseparable from the environment itself. By the final phase of the Cretaceous, mosasaurs had become woven into the structure of the sea so completely that imagining the oceans without them would have seemed almost impossible. Their fossils preserve that moment of maximum reach, when the family occupied nearly every major marine system on the planet, and the balance of the ocean seemed settled into a lasting order beneath the waves. The end began with an object that had spent billions of years moving silently through space. 66 million years ago, a bolide estimated between 10 and 15 kilometers wide entered Earth's atmosphere above the ancient sea, covering what is now the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. For most of its existence, it had traveled unnoticed through the darkness between planets. Then, within moments, it altered the trajectory of life on Earth. The impact struck shallow marine water with unimaginable force, energy equivalent to roughly 10 billion Hiroshima atomic bombs released almost instantly as the asteroid slammed into carbonate rock and seawater at hypervelocity. Ocean and crust ceased to behave like ordinary matter under such conditions. Rock vaporized. Water exploded outward as superheated steam. A crater, more than 180 kilometers wide, began forming beneath the collapsing sea. Everything within thousands of kilometers died almost immediately. A fireball expanded outward across the atmosphere, igniting forests and coastal ecosystems far beyond the impact site. Mega tsunamis radiated through nearby oceans, carrying walls of water hundreds of meters high across continental margins. Pressure waves circled the planet repeatedly, disturbing atmosphere and sea alike long after the collision itself ended. For marine ecosystems, the location of the impact proved especially destructive. Because the asteroid struck shallow carbonate-rich water, enormous quantities of sulfur dioxide, carbon dioxide, pulverized rock, and vaporized seawater blasted high into the atmosphere within minutes. Debris spread globally. Tiny molten particles rained back toward the surface, heating the atmosphere further as they fell. Then came the darkness. Within weeks, dust, soot, and sulfate aerosols suspended in the upper atmosphere blocked large amounts of incoming sunlight. Photosynthesis collapsed across land and sea. In the oceans, phytoplankton populations declined catastrophically as sunlight failed to penetrate surface waters. These microscopic organisms form the base of the marine food web, supporting nearly every larger life form through chains of energy transfer accumulated over millions of years. The collapse unfolded from the bottom upward. Studies suggest marine primary productivity may have fallen by roughly 70 to 80% within a year of the impact. Zooplankton populations declined soon afterward as their food sources disappeared. Invertebrates starved. Fish populations contracted sharply. Predators that depended upon those fish encountered an ocean growing progressively emptier with each passing season. The thermal stability of the planet also broke apart. Immediately after the impact, greenhouse gases released from vaporized rock and widespread fires contributed to short-term warming. Yet this phase gave way to prolonged cooling as atmospheric aerosols reflected sunlight back into space. Surface temperatures fluctuated violently compared to the relatively stable climate systems of the Late Cretaceous. Marine ecosystems, adapted to long intervals of warmth and productivity, suddenly faced environmental oscillations, unfolding faster than evolutionary processes could respond. For Mosasaurus, these changes proved catastrophic. Large-bodied marine predators require immense and continuous food intake. A mature mosasaur depended upon thriving prey populations spread across productive oceans. It could not survive on scattered scavenging opportunities or small isolated food sources for long periods. As an air-breathing reptile, it also remained tied to surface conditions increasingly disrupted by climatic instability and collapsing ecosystems. Nothing about the anatomy that once made mosasaurs so successful protected them from an ocean losing its biological foundation. Speed, powerful jaws, advanced sensory systems, and enormous size all depended upon a world rich in prey and stable in productivity. When that underlying abundance disappeared, the dominance built across millions of years became suddenly fragile. The asteroid itself lasted only moments. Its consequences unfolded over years, decades, and centuries as sunlight faded, food webs unraveled, and the ancient marine order that had sustained mosasaurs slowly began to fail beneath darkened skies and cooling seas. Long after the firestorms faded and the great waves settled back into the sea, the oceans entered a quieter catastrophe. Mosasaurus did not vanish in a single violent moment. No fossil evidence suggests entire populations were instantly erased by the impact itself. The final chapter unfolded more slowly, across darkened seasons and failing ecosystems, as hunger spread through the water column from the microscopic world upward. A mature Mosasaurus hoffmanii weighed roughly 15 tons. An animal of that size required extraordinary quantities of food simply to remain alive. Estimates suggest an adult may have needed between 2 and 5% of its body weight in prey each day, perhaps 300 to 750 kilograms in a functioning marine ecosystem. Before the extinction event, the Cretaceous seas could sustain those demands. Dense fish populations, abundant reptiles, ammonites, turtles, and diving birds formed an immense web of available energy. After the collapse of marine productivity, that abundance disappeared. Even if mosasaurs possessed partially elevated metabolisms, allowing activity in cooler waters and deeper habitats, such physiology became a liability once prey populations crashed. A large active predator cannot lower its energy demands indefinitely. It cannot shrink its body quickly enough to match a starving ocean. The same adaptations that once made mosasaurs supreme hunters now trapped them inside biological requirements the post-impact world could no longer support. Reproduction offered little protection against such rapid ecological collapse. Mosasaurs gave birth to relatively small litters, likely between 4 and 10 offspring after long developmental periods. This strategy worked well in stable ecosystems, where large predators experienced few natural threats after reaching maturity. Yet, recovery from catastrophic population decline becomes painfully slow for animals reproducing at such low rates. The youngest mosasaurs faced even harsher conditions. Neonates entered oceans where fish populations had already declined sharply, and food chains had fractured at multiple levels. Fossil evidence from earlier periods suggests juvenile mosasaurs once depended on productive coastal nursery habitats, rich in smaller prey. Those ecosystems now suffered from collapsing plankton communities and unstable climates. Entire generations of newborn mosasaurs may have died within months, not from predation, but from simple absence. The fossil timeline reflects this sudden unraveling. The most recent known mosasaur remains occur within approximately 150,000 years of the Chicxulub impact, a geological instant so brief it resembles a sharp line in Earth's history rather than a gradual fading. Across sediments worldwide, mosasaurs disappear almost simultaneously, alongside ammonites and many other marine groups tied closely to high-productivity ecosystems. The animals that survived the end Cretaceous extinction shared very different traits. Small body size reduced energy demands. Some species could endure long periods with minimal food. Others relied on detritus or buried organic matter rather than active hunting. Certain organisms entered dormant states during environmental stress. Mosasaurs possessed none of these advantages. Their lives depended upon movement, oxygen, and enormous quantities of living prey. There was also nowhere left to retreat. Because mosasaurs occupied nearly every major marine basin on Earth, they remained exposed to a planetary catastrophe without refuge. Polar populations, coastal specialists, deep water hunters, and smaller regional species all faced the same collapsing food web. The oceans had once allowed the family to spread across the world with extraordinary success. Now that same global distribution ensured every lineage encountered the same ecological disaster. At the boundary layer marking the end of the Cretaceous, the Mosasauridae family tree simply stops. No reduced descendants appear afterward. No isolated survivors emerge in younger sediments. An entire dynasty of marine reptiles, shaped across millions of years into one of the most formidable predator groups Earth had ever produced, vanished together beneath the silence of a changed ocean. In quiet cliffs and exposed canyon walls, the ending still waits as a line thin enough to cover with a fingertip. Geologists call it the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary, or the KPG boundary, a narrow seam separating two entirely different Earths. In many places, it appears as a dark band of clay less than a centimeter thick, pressed between older Cretaceous rock below and younger Paleogene sediment above. This layer has been identified on every continent and across the ocean floor, from desert outcrops to deep marine cores raised slowly from beneath modern seas. The boundary is so consistent, so globally synchronized, that it functions almost like a timestamp written directly into the crust of the planet. Below that line lies the final world of mosasaurs. The sediments beneath the boundary contain the familiar abundance of the late Cretaceous ocean, ammonites with coiled shells, giant marine reptiles, diverse sharks, thick-shelled turtles, and the remains of predators that ruled every major marine basin. Mosasaur fossils appear repeatedly through these layers, sometimes isolated, sometimes scattered among dense marine assemblages that speak of productive ecosystems and stable food webs. Their bones occur in chalk deposits, offshore mudstones, and shallow marine sediments formed while the seas still pulsed with the richness that had sustained giant predators for millions of years. Then the boundary arrives, abrupt and strangely silent. Above it, the fossil record changes almost immediately. Large marine reptiles vanish. Ammonites disappear entirely. Non-avian dinosaurs never appear again. The surviving fauna becomes smaller, simpler, and far less diverse. In marine sediments deposited after the extinction, the dominant survivors are organisms with modest energy requirements and flexible diets, creatures capable of enduring scarcity in ways the great predators never could. One of the most important clues hidden within the boundary clay is iridium. On Earth, iridium is extremely rare in surface rocks because most of it sank deep into the planet's core during Earth's formation. In asteroids, however, iridium remains comparatively abundant. When scientists analyzed samples from the KPG layer during the late 20th century, they discovered iridium concentrations roughly 30 to 130 times higher than the surrounding rock. The anomaly appeared worldwide. Such a sudden, global enrichment could not easily be explained by ordinary geological processes. It pointed instead toward an extraterrestrial source, debris scattered through the atmosphere after the impact of a massive asteroid. The sharpness of the extinction remains one of the boundary's most haunting features. In high-resolution stratigraphic sections, the transition from the thriving ecosystems of the late Cretaceous to the diminished world of the Paleogene occurs across only a few centimeters of stone. Depending on sedimentation rates, those centimeters may represent merely thousands of years, perhaps even less in some locations. Compared with the immense span of geological time, the collapse was nearly instantaneous. Mosasaur fossils approach this dividing line with remarkable closeness. The youngest confirmed specimens occur approximately 150,000 years below the boundary in the best studied formations. Some paleontologists interpret this as evidence of a slight decline before the impact, while others argue it reflects the incompleteness of preservation in the final sediments of the Cretaceous. Fossilization is never perfectly continuous. Entire populations can live and vanish without leaving remains in the narrow slices of rock later exposed to human eyes. Yet the broader pattern remains unmistakable. A geologist standing beside an exposed KPG boundary can place one hand below the clay and touch sediments formed in a world where mosasaurs still crossed ancient seas. A few centimeters higher rests a planet where they no longer existed at all. For a long span after the boundary clay settled across the planet, the oceans carried an unusual silence at their highest levels. The extinction of the mosasaurs removed more than a single predator lineage. It erased an entire structure of marine dominance that had shaped ocean ecosystems for millions of years. Since the end Permian extinction roughly 186 million years earlier, no marine collapse had emptied the upper food chain so completely. In the late Cretaceous, giant predators had existed in nearly every major sea on Earth. After the extinction, that global presence vanished almost at once. The early Paleogene ocean remained biologically alive, yet strangely diminished. Fish survived, smaller sharks endured, crustaceans, mollusks, and scattered reptilian holdovers persisted through the aftermath. But for several million years, no marine hunter approached the scale or ecological reach once held by Mosasaurus and its relatives. The top of the oceanic food web stood largely unoccupied, as though evolution itself required time to recover from the sudden removal of such immense predators. Into that absence, new lineages slowly began to expand. Among the most significant were the ancestors of whales. During the earliest Paleogene, these animals still belonged mostly to the land. Small hoofed mammals moved along ancient shorelines, feeding in estuaries and coastal wetlands. Over millions of years, some gradually returned to the sea, following pathways strangely reminiscent of the ancient transition once taken by the mosasaurs themselves. Limbs transformed, bodies elongated, nostrils migrated upward, tails became the primary engines of movement through open water. By approximately 40 million years ago, Basilosaurus emerged as one of the first truly large predatory whales. Reaching lengths near 18 meters, it occupied a role comparable in scale to the giant marine reptiles that had disappeared before it. Yet the timing carries its own quiet significance. Roughly 26 million years separated the extinction of Mosasaurus from the rise of Basilosaurus. Evolution required an immense stretch of geological time to produce another predator capable of ruling the seas at similar size. Sharks also expanded during this interval. With the disappearance of mosasaurs and many competing marine reptiles, surviving shark lineages diversified into ecological spaces that had once been heavily contested. New forms appeared throughout Paleogene oceans, including ancestors of modern lamnid sharks. Some specialized in swift pursuit hunting. Others adapted to feeding on marine mammals that became increasingly abundant as whale evolution accelerated. Much later, approximately 23 million years ago, the giant shark known as Megalodon entered the oceans. Estimated lengths range between 15 and 20 meters, placing it among the largest predatory fish Earth has ever produced. Like Mosasaurus before it, Megalodon occupied the role of a globally distributed apex hunter capable of feeding on enormous prey. And like Mosasaurus, it eventually disappeared. By approximately 3.6 million years ago, Megalodon 2 had vanished from the fossil record. A pattern slowly becomes visible across these separate ages of the sea. Again and again, evolution produced immense apex predators that achieved extraordinary dominance over marine ecosystems. Yet none endured permanently. The larger and more specialized the predator became, the more tightly its survival depended upon stable oceans, abundant prey, and complex food webs remaining intact across vast distances and immense spans of time. The modern ocean still contains powerful hunters. Sperm whales descend into darkness in pursuit of giant squid. Orcas coordinate attacks with remarkable intelligence. Great white sharks move through coastal waters with quiet efficiency. Yet no living marine predator commands the same combination of global distribution, overwhelming diversity, and ecological supremacy once achieved by the Mosasauridae. The ancient vacancy left by their extinction was eventually filled, but never in quite the same way again. Along the shorelines of the ancient Tethys Sea, small reptiles once moved between rock, sand, and shallow water without any sign of the future hidden inside their bodies. From those modest coastal hunters emerged one of the largest marine predators Earth has ever known. The transformation unfolded gradually across millions of years, preserved through skulls, vertebrae, flippers, and teeth scattered through sediments that once rested beneath warm Cretaceous seas. Few evolutionary stories are documented with such continuity. Mosasaurus and its relatives reveal, step by step, how a lineage tied to land became entirely committed to the open ocean. Biologists describe this process as secondary aquatic adaptation, the return of land-dwelling vertebrates to marine life after their distant ancestors had already evolved on land. The transition occurred many times in Earth's history. Whales followed it, seals followed it, penguins and sea turtles followed it as well. Each lineage began from a different starting point, yet the broad pattern remained strikingly similar. First came animals living along coasts and estuaries, comfortable in shallow water but still dependent upon land. Over time, limbs flattened and became more efficient for swimming. Skeletons loosened or elongated. Tails strengthened. Body proportions shifted toward streamlining. Eventually, the descendants lost the ability to move effectively on shore at all. Reproduction, feeding, migration, and hunting became bound entirely to the sea. Mosasaur evolution followed this sequence with remarkable clarity. The earliest forms still retained functional limbs and likely returned to land regularly. Later species developed solid paddle-like flippers, shark-shaped tail flukes, and bodies built for sustained movement through open water. By the time Mosasaurus hoffmanni appeared during the Late Cretaceous, the transition had become complete. Its ancestors had crossed a biological threshold beyond which return to terrestrial life was no longer possible. The speed of this transformation remains extraordinary. From small coastal reptiles to giant apex predators measuring up to 17 meters, the process unfolded across approximately 27 million years. In geological terms, that span is relatively brief. Whale evolution, from small shoreline mammals to fully marine giants, occurred on a comparable timescale, suggesting that under strong ecological pressure, evolution can reshape entire body plans with surprising rapidity. The ocean itself appears to guide those changes toward familiar forms. Mosasaur tails developed crescent-shaped flukes, suited for efficient propulsion. Their bodies became streamlined, their eyes enlarged for underwater vision. Yet these same traits evolved independently in ichthyosaurs more than 150 million years earlier, despite ichthyosaurs descending from entirely different reptilian ancestors. This pattern is known as convergent evolution. Similar environments repeatedly push unrelated animals towards similar anatomical solutions, as though the physics of water quietly narrows the range of successful possibilities. But adaptation alone does not explain the rise of mosasaurs. Their expansion depended upon contingency, the unpredictable influence of earlier events. If the Cenomanian-Turonian anoxic event had not devastated ichthyosaurs and disrupted older marine ecosystems, mosasaurs might never have achieved global dominance. The opening left behind by extinction created ecological opportunities that did not previously exist. Catastrophe shaped the path of evolution as profoundly as competition or natural selection. This pattern echoes across the history of life. During the Cambrian period, Anomalocaris once ruled ancient seas. Much later came giant predatory fish, marine reptiles, enormous sharks, and whales. Each appeared powerful and permanent within its own age. Yet every apex predator eventually vanished, replaced by forms that could only emerge after older dominances collapsed. Mosasaurus tells the story not simply of power, but of impermanence, of life continuously reshaping itself as worlds change around it. Deep beneath the hills near Maastricht, quarry workers once chipped through soft chalk without knowing they were uncovering one of the most important fossils in scientific history. In 1764, laborers working in underground limestone tunnels exposed a massive skull unlike anything familiar to them. The bones emerged from ancient marine sediments laid down at the bottom of the Cretaceous Sea, though no one at the time possessed the scientific framework to understand what they represented. The skull passed through private hands and became an object of curiosity, displayed and discussed as something strange and oversized, perhaps a crocodile or a giant fish from a forgotten world. For decades, the fossil existed in a state between myth and science. Then, around 1770, another skull appeared from the same quarry system. This specimen was more complete and attracted the attention of Dr. Johann Leonard Hoffmann, a local physician with an interest in natural history. Hoffmann attempted to study the fossil systematically, recognizing that it belonged to no living animal known in Europe. Yet even then, the idea that entire species could disappear from Earth remained controversial. Many scholars still believed all creatures created by nature must continue to exist somewhere, perhaps hidden in unexplored regions. History intervened before the mystery could be solved quietly. In 1795, during the upheaval of the French Revolutionary Wars, French forces captured Maastricht. Stories later circulated among soldiers and townspeople that the occupying army offered 600 bottles of wine to anyone who could recover the great fossil skull, which had reportedly been hidden to prevent its seizure. Eventually, the specimen was located and transported to Paris as part of the spoils of war, joining the growing collections of the French scientific establishment. There, in 1808, the fossil reached Georges Cuvier. Cuvier approached the skull with a method unlike that of earlier naturalists. Rather than treating it as a curiosity, he compared its anatomy systematically with living reptiles. The shape of the jaws, the teeth, and the skull architecture convinced him the animal represented an enormous extinct marine lizard. His analysis became one of the first rigorous scientific demonstrations that extinction was real, that entire forms of life had once existed and vanished completely from Earth. The fossil from Maastricht helped alter humanity's understanding of time itself. In 1822, the English geologist William Daniel Conybeare formally named the genus Mosasaurus, meaning Meuse lizard, after the nearby Meuse River flowing through the region where the skull had been discovered. By then, the ancient marine reptile had already become central to the emerging science of paleontology. During the 19th century, attention shifted across the Atlantic to the chalk beds of central North America. Beginning in the 1860s, fossil hunters working in Kansas uncovered extraordinary mosasaur remains preserved within sediments of the former Western Interior Seaway. These discoveries unfolded during the famous Bone Wars, an intense rivalry between paleontologists Othniel Charles Marsh and Edward Drinker Cope. Both men competed fiercely for specimens, sending crews into remote badlands and quarries in search of new fossils. Mosasaurs became prized discoveries within this escalating scientific contest. As the 20th century progressed, the study of mosasaurs transformed again. Paleontology moved beyond description into increasingly quantitative science. CT scanning allowed researchers to examine skull cavities and inner ear structures without damaging fossils. Isotopic analysis extracted information about temperature, migration, and metabolism from tooth enamel. Phylogenetic methods compared anatomical traits across reptile lineages, revealing evolutionary relationships with greater precision than earlier generations could imagine. Even now, the story remains unfinished. New mosasaur species continue to emerge from museum collections and recently explored regions, particularly across Africa, South America, and the Middle East. Roughly 2 or 3 new species are formally described each year, extending a scientific journey that began more than 2 centuries ago in the dim chalk tunnels beneath Maastricht. Long before paleontology existed, ancient bones occasionally emerged from cliffs, riverbanks, and broken hillsides, carrying fragments of worlds no human memory could truly recognize. Across the Great Plains of North America, erosion exposed immense vertebrae and jaws from the sediments of the former Western Interior Seaway. These fossils appeared within territories inhabited for generations by Native American peoples whose oral traditions often included powerful beings associated with water, serpents, and creatures dwelling beneath rivers or inland seas, remembered only through stone and story. Some researchers have proposed that discoveries of marine reptile fossils may have influenced certain narratives describing enormous aquatic beings. Direct connections remain difficult to confirm with certainty, yet the geographical overlap between fossil-rich formations and these traditions continues to draw careful scholarly attention. Among the Lakota, references connected to great water creatures appear within names and stories associated with regions once covered by the inland sea. Ethnographers remain cautious about drawing definitive conclusions, since oral traditions evolve across centuries and cannot always be tied cleanly to specific fossil discoveries. Still, the possibility lingers quietly. A giant vertebra weathering from chalk beside a riverbank would not have resembled any living animal familiar to human observers. Even fragmented remains carried an undeniable strangeness. On the opposite side of the Atlantic, similar echoes appeared along the coasts bordering the North Sea and English Channel. These regions contain abundant marine reptile fossils preserved within ancient chalk deposits. Medieval European traditions frequently described sea serpents, monstrous creatures moving through dark coastal waters or washing ashore after storms. Paleontologists have occasionally noted the intriguing geographical overlap between these legends and areas rich in mosasaur remains. The connection remains speculative rather than proven history, yet it reflects a recurring pattern within human culture. When unfamiliar bones emerge from the ground, imagination often moves first, long before science arrives with names and classifications. By the early 19th century, the Maastricht skull had already become something different from myth. Displayed in Paris after its removal during the Revolutionary Wars, the fossil attracted enormous public fascination. Visitors crowded around the gigantic jaws and strange teeth, confronting physical evidence that the natural world had once contained forms unlike anything alive in their own age. Decades before dinosaurs became dominant in popular culture, the mosasaur skull stood as one of Europe's most famous prehistoric specimens. Its influence reached beyond curiosity alone. The fossil helped shape the emerging realization that extinction was real, that entire groups of animals had vanished from Earth forever. This idea altered how humanity understood time, nature, and the history of life itself. Mosasaurus occupied a singular position within that transformation because it became publicly known before the great dinosaur discoveries of the later 19th century. In many ways, the marine reptile arrived first in the cultural imagination, introducing audiences to the concept of deep prehistory before Tyrannosaurus or Triceratops had even been named. Centuries later, Mosasaurus entered modern cinema. In the Jurassic World film series, it appears as a colossal marine predator, reaching approximately 25 meters in length, substantially larger than scientific evidence supports. Real Mosasaurus hoffmanni likely reached between 14 and 17 meters, yet the cinematic portrayal reflects something deeper than simple exaggeration. Among prehistoric animals, mosasaurs possess a visual presence that resonates immediately. Immense jaws, powerful aquatic movement, and the suggestion of hidden depth beneath open water. The fictional version became one of the largest representations of any real prehistoric animal ever placed into mainstream film. Even so, beneath the spectacle remains the older story. Before the scientific papers, before the museums, before the movies and reconstructed skeletons, there were scattered bones emerging from stone and human beings standing beside them in uncertainty. Mosasaurus existed within imagination long before it possessed a formal name, moving through folklore, curiosity, and wonder, centuries before science understood what had once ruled the ancient sea. Even after centuries of excavation, comparison, scanning, and chemical analysis, Mosasaurus still drifts through science with parts of its life concealed beneath stone and time. Some uncertainties begin at the level of the body itself. The question of thermoregulation remains unsettled despite increasingly sophisticated techniques. Certain isotopic studies suggest mosasaurs maintained body temperatures above the surrounding water, implying a partially warm-blooded metabolism that would have supported activity in colder regions and deeper seas. Other analyses point toward a more traditional reptilian physiology, perhaps with only limited metabolic elevation. A third possibility occupies the quiet middle ground between them, regional heterothermy, in which specific tissues such as swimming muscles or the brain remained warmer than the rest of the body. Tuna and leatherback turtles use similar strategies today. The fossil evidence supports aspects of each interpretation without fully resolving the debate. Size, strangely, remains another uncertainty. The often cited estimate of 17 meters for Mosasaurus hoffmanni comes not from a complete skeleton, but from mathematical extrapolation using partial remains. No fully articulated giant specimen has ever emerged from the rock intact. Vertebrae, jaws, and isolated skull fragments hint at extraordinary dimensions, yet the upper limit remains blurred. Somewhere in the late Cretaceous ocean, there may once have existed individuals larger than current estimates suggest, bodies that left only fragments behind after burial, scavenging, and 80 million years of geological pressure. Behavior leaves even fainter traces. No fossil has revealed whether mosasaurs traveled alone through open water or gathered seasonally in breeding grounds rich with prey. Modern marine predators display an enormous range of social strategies. Orcas move in complex family groups. Great white sharks spend much of their lives alone. Sea turtles cross oceans independently, yet converge at nesting regions with remarkable precision. Mosasaurs left no preserved trackways across the seafloor, no nesting colonies, no direct behavioral record beyond scattered interactions frozen by unusual accidents of fossilization. The skin impressions, discovered in several specimens, deepen another mystery rather than solving it. They preserve the texture of small scales, arranged in tight diamond patterns, enough to reconstruct the surface of the animal with reasonable confidence. Yet fossilized skin carries no surviving pigment. No evidence reveals whether Mosasaurus possessed countershading, like modern sharks. Dark dorsal coloration for concealment from above, pale undersides blending with surface light, or perhaps patterns entirely unfamiliar to the modern ocean. The animal that exists in museums and documentaries remains colorless beneath its reconstruction. Time itself also remains difficult to measure inside extinct creatures. Growth rings within mosasaur bones suggest relatively rapid development, faster than many modern reptiles of comparable size. Some researchers estimate lifespans between 20 and 30 years, though these conclusions rely on limited samples and incomplete growth series. Whether a giant mature mosasaur represented the equivalent of middle age or old age remains uncertain. Even movement across the planet leaves only indirect traces. Chemical signatures preserved within tooth enamel hint at migration between different water masses during an individual's life. Variations in oxygen isotopes suggest changes in temperature and salinity, as though some mosasaurs crossed enormous marine distances between feeding grounds and breeding habitats. Yet no complete migratory map exists. The true scale of their journeys remains partially hidden within oceans that vanished tens of millions of years ago. Perhaps the most debated uncertainty concerns their final years. Some studies suggest mosasaur diversity may already have been declining before the asteroid struck Earth, possibly due to long-term ecological instability or changing sea levels near the end of the Cretaceous. Other analyses indicate they remained abundant and globally successful until the impact itself shattered marine productivity. The distinction matters deeply. One possibility describes a dynasty already weakening. The other describes sudden annihilation at the height of power. For all the measurements, scans, and discoveries, the Cretaceous Sea still withholds parts of its memory. Each newly uncovered fossil answers one question, while quietly opening another, allowing Mosasaurus to remain not only a subject of science, but also a frontier within it. Long before any human hand shaped stone into tools, before grass spread across continents, before the Himalayas rose into the sky, Mosasaurus had already entered the ocean and begun its long dominion there. Its reign lasted approximately 25 million years. That number moves through the mind almost without texture at first, too large for ordinary memory to hold comfortably. Human lives are measured in decades, civilizations in centuries. Even the oldest buildings standing today occupy only a tiny fraction of that span. Modern Homo sapiens has existed for roughly 300,000 years. Mosasaurus ruled the seas for more than 80 times longer than our entire species has walked the earth. Written history narrows the scale even further. From the earliest cuneiform tablets pressed into Mesopotamian clay to the present day lies a distance of roughly 5,000 years. The mosasaurs persisted through a duration 5,000 times greater than all recorded human memory combined. Entire languages appeared and vanished in less time than a single geological heartbeat of the late Cretaceous. Empires, too, become strangely brief when placed beside deep time. The Roman Empire endured for approximately 500 years in its Western form, a span that feels immense within human storytelling. Yet Mosasaurus remained in the ocean long enough for 50,000 Roman empires to rise and disappear one after another, like waves folding into a shoreline. Even the rhythm of day and night accumulates into astonishing scale across such ages. During the time mosasaurs inhabited the seas, the sun rose and set approximately 9 billion times. Morning light crossed the Cretaceous ocean again and again over countless generations of predators, prey, hatchlings, storms, migrations, and extinctions too small to leave any lasting mark in stone. Meanwhile, the planet itself continued moving beneath them. The Atlantic Ocean widened by roughly 250 kilometers during the Mosasaur era as tectonic plates drifted apart grain by grain beneath the seafloor. Coastal plains drowned beneath rising waters, then emerged again elsewhere. Sediment gathered in quiet basins until entire chalk formations accumulated from the remains of microscopic organisms sinking through the water column. Mountain ranges lifted upward and slowly eroded under wind and rain, while Mosasaurus still hunted offshore. The western interior seaway, once stretching through the center of North America like a vast inland ocean, also belonged to this slow transformation. Mosasaurs crossed its warm waters for millions of years, while ammonites spiraled below and seabirds skimmed above the surface. Yet the seaway itself did not survive. As tectonic uplift reshaped the continent near the end of the Cretaceous, the waters gradually withdrew. Mud became sedimentary rock, ancient coastlines became prairie. Today the Great Plains stand where that ocean once existed. Fields of wheat now cover regions where mosasaurs pursued fish through open water. Fossils emerge from dry Kansas chalk under skies untouched by tides, fragments of vertebrae and teeth resting thousands of kilometers from the nearest ocean. The ruler of one world became mineral within another. This scale alters the meaning of success in evolution. Human achievement often measures itself in generations, dynasties, or historical eras. In deep time, those intervals become nearly invisible. Evolution measures success differently, through persistence across environmental upheaval, through millions of years of reproductive continuity, through the ability of a lineage to dominate ecosystems while continents drift and climates transform around it. By that standard, Mosasaurus stands among the most successful large predators Earth has ever produced. Its dynasty endured not briefly, not accidentally, but across a span of time so immense that entire oceans were born and erased during its rule. Across the history of life, dominance has always appeared solid while it lasted. The reefs of the Cambrian once belonged to strange armored hunters that vanished long before the first forests appeared. Later, other rulers inherited the oceans and lost them in turn. By the late Cretaceous, that inheritance rested with Mosasaurus, an animal so completely suited to its environment that the seas themselves seemed shaped around it. Its body matched the world that produced it with extraordinary precision. The oceans of the Cretaceous were warm, expansive, chemically rich, and filled with dense layers of prey moving through every depth of the water column. Mosasaurus evolved into exactly the predator such an environment rewarded. Its powerful tail propelled it through open water with efficiency. Its jaws handled prey ranging from armored ammonites to giant turtles. Its sensory systems tracked movement, chemical traces, and dim light across enormous marine distances. Every feature refined the animal toward success within a stable and productive ecosystem. Yet evolution carries a quiet condition inside every specialization. The more completely an organism adapts to a particular world, the more deeply it becomes tied to the continued existence of that world. Ecologists describe this as the specialization-vulnerability trade-off. A creature optimized for one set of environmental conditions often loses flexibility outside them. Mosasaurus became extraordinarily effective within the late Cretaceous ocean, but that effectiveness depended upon prey, abundance, stable marine productivity, and interconnected food webs extending from microscopic plankton upward through fish, reptiles, and seabirds. When those foundations vanished, its adaptations could not protect it. Mosasaurus was not defeated in combat. No rival lineage evolved superior hunting strategies or gradually displaced it from the ecosystem. Its extinction arrived from entirely outside the logic of biological competition. A bolide entered the atmosphere from deep space, struck the planet, and transformed the chemistry and climate of Earth faster than large marine predators could adapt. There is something profoundly quiet within that realization. The asteroid did not distinguish between successful species and unsuccessful ones. It did not target the dominant predators specifically. The same darkness spread across every ocean basin and continent alike. Yet survival after the impact followed patterns that often seemed disconnected from power. The creatures that endured were generally small, metabolically modest, and ecologically flexible. Many could feed on detritus, burrow underground, tolerate scarcity, or survive long intervals with minimal energy intake. The rulers of the Cretaceous ocean possessed almost none of those advantages. A mature mosasaur required enormous quantities of food simply to maintain its body. Its reproductive strategy favored relatively few offspring. Its physiology had evolved for active predation within abundant ecosystems rather than prolonged deprivation. The very traits that once elevated it to dominance became liabilities once the ocean changed beyond recognition. Meanwhile, tiny survivors moved quietly through the ruins of the extinction. Small fish scavenged among drifting debris. Burrowing animals endured beneath sediment and soil. Generalist feeders consumed whatever organic matter remained available. They were not the celebrated powers of their age. Most occupied ecological margins, while mosasaurs still ruled the seas overhead, yet flexibility mattered more than supremacy once stability collapsed. Paleontology returns to this pattern repeatedly across deep time. Dominance does not guarantee permanence. Strength does not ensure continuity. The most successful organism in one environment may become completely unsuited to the next through no failure of its own. Evolution rewards fitness only within the conditions currently present, never within conditions still to come. In that sense, Mosasaurus becomes more than a vanished marine reptile. It becomes a reminder written into stone that every ecological empire, no matter how immense or long-lasting, remains temporary beneath the larger movements of Earth and cosmos. The apex predators of one world eventually become the fossils through which later worlds learn how brief dominance truly is. The ocean, Mosasaurus, inhabited, no longer exists, yet pieces of it remain scattered across the modern Earth like fragments of a vanished language still embedded within the landscape. Some traces rise directly from the sea. Along the southern coast of England, the white cliffs of Dover stand above the channel in pale layers of chalk accumulated during the late Cretaceous. Each cliff face is built from the compressed remains of microscopic coccolithophores that once drifted through warm ancient waters in unimaginable numbers. Their calcium carbonate shells settled slowly onto the seafloor over millions of years, creating sediment thick enough to become stone. A person walking those cliffs today moves across the compacted floor of the ocean Mosasaurus once crossed, though the water itself disappeared tens of millions of years ago. Far inland, another section of that ancient seabed lies exposed beneath open skies. The Niobrara Chalk stretches through Kansas and neighboring states in soft, pale formations shaped by wind, rain, and seasonal erosion. During the Cretaceous, this region rested beneath the western interior seaway, a shallow marine corridor dividing North America nearly in half. Now, after winter storms loosen the sediment each year, bones emerge quietly from the hillsides. Vertebrae of mosasaurs, fish scales, fragments of seabird wings, and spiraled ammonite shells appear briefly in the light before weather and gravity reclaim them again. Above the Niobrara lies the darker Pierre Shale, deposited in somewhat deeper waters as conditions within the seaway shifted over time. These sediments preserve another layer of the vanished ecosystem, including exceptionally detailed mosasaur specimens with stomach contents and soft tissue impressions still visible within the rock. Excavations continue there even now, each field season adding small pieces to the reconstruction of a world that ended 66 million years ago. The seaway itself also shaped the continent long after its waters withdrew. The broad flatness of the Great Plains reflects the slow deposition of marine sediments across the continental interior. Beneath parts of the Midwest, major freshwater aquifers occupy porous rock layers formed through the geological history of the seaway's expansion and drainage. Even the slight eastward tilt of central North America carries echoes of tectonic forces connected to that vanished inland ocean. Elsewhere, the legacy became buried deeper. Large portions of the oil and gas reserves beneath the Gulf Coast originated partly from the compressed organic matter of ancient marine life deposited during the Cretaceous. Algae, plankton, and countless drifting organisms accumulated in oxygen-poor sediments where decomposition slowed enough for carbon-rich material to remain trapped underground. The immense productivity of the ocean, Mosasaurus ruled, still lingers within Earth's crust, extracted today as fuel formed from sunlight, captured nearly 100 million years ago. The modern ocean contains predators that occupy similar ecological roles, though none command the same overwhelming dominance. Orcas patrol coastal waters with cooperative intelligence and flexible hunting strategies. Great white sharks move through temperate seas with senses refined for ambush and pursuit. Sperm whales descend into darkness in search of giant squid. In function, each inherits part of the predatory space, once occupied by mosasaurs, even though their ancestry follows entirely different paths through evolution. Yet the oceans they inhabit feel quieter than the Cretaceous seas. Marine productivity today remains lower than during the Late Cretaceous greenhouse world. Giant marine reptiles no longer patrol tropical seaways. The immense inland oceans that once flooded continents have drained away. What remains is calmer, cooler, and in many ways less dangerous. Still, beneath cliffs, plains, shale beds, and ocean floors, the older world persists in fragments, waiting patiently inside stone for those willing to read it. Across approximately 25 million years, generations of mosasaurs moved through ancient oceans beneath changing constellations and shifting continents. Their lineage survived fluctuations in sea level, volcanic episodes, migrations of prey, and transformations of entire marine ecosystems. By the standards of biology, Mosasaurus was not merely successful. It belonged among the most enduring large predators Earth has ever produced. And then the lineage ended. No hidden population endured in isolated waters. No reduced descendant adapted quietly into the Paleogene world. The family vanished with a completeness rare, even in the fossil record. The boundary clay separating the Cretaceous from the age that followed marks the disappearance with unsettling precision, as though a vast chapter of life closed in a single motion. What remains now is fragmentary and silent. Compressed vertebrae lie inside chalk and shale deposited at the bottom of vanished seas. Tooth enamel still carries chemical traces of ancient water temperatures and migration patterns. In museums, skulls rest beneath soft artificial light, their empty eye sockets fixed forever forward. One of those skulls, recovered from the stone beneath Maastricht more than 2 centuries ago, helped reveal that extinction itself was real, that entire worlds of living things had existed long before human memory and disappeared entirely from the earth. There is something difficult to fully absorb in the scale of that absence. Mosasaurus was exquisitely adapted to its environment. It possessed efficient locomotion, advanced sensory systems, immense size, and access to nearly every major prey category within the Late Cretaceous ocean. Nothing within its ecosystem appears to have surpassed it. Yet none of that mattered when conditions changed beyond the narrow boundaries its biology could tolerate. The catastrophe that ended its reign arrived from beyond the atmosphere, indifferent to strength, intelligence, or evolutionary achievement. Paleontology carries this realization quietly within almost every fossil bed. The Earth visible today often feels stable and permanent because human lives occupy such small spans of time. Mountains appear motionless, oceans seem eternal. Ecosystems feel fixed enough to name and map. Yet the rocks beneath those systems preserve evidence of repeated endings. Entire biospheres have risen, flourished for millions of years, and disappeared so thoroughly that their existence would remain unknown without the accidental persistence of bone and sediment. The Cretaceous ocean belongs to that category of vanished realities. Its warm inland seas, immense reptilian predators, ammonite shoals, and polar marine ecosystems can be reconstructed with remarkable detail through geology and comparative biology, yet the world itself remains unreachable. It exists only as inference assembled from mineral traces, as though science were carefully rebuilding the outline of a dream from scattered fragments left behind after waking. Still, something larger than the individual organism persists across these disappearances. The evolutionary pressures that shaped Mosasaurus did not vanish with the animal itself. Predation, competition, adaptation, and ecological opportunity continue moving through life like recurring currents. Again and again, across deep time, evolution produces large marine hunters suited to the conditions of their age. Different bodies emerge from different ancestries, yet similar forms return because the ocean repeatedly favors certain solutions. Someday, under climates and coastlines not yet formed, another great predator may rise into ecological dominance within seas, unlike any that exist now. And long after the cities, languages, and nations of the present have faded into their own thin geological layer, the stone of that future world may preserve its bones as patiently as the earth preserved those of Mosasaurus. Out in the dry chalk beds of western Kansas, beneath grasslands that sway quietly under modern winds, fragments of a vanished ocean continue rising toward daylight at a pace too slow for any person to witness directly. Winter ice loosens the sediment. Spring rain carries away grains of ancient seafloor, one thin layer at a time. Somewhere beneath that pale ground, a mosasaur vertebra or jawbone may already rest only centimeters below the surface, waiting with the stillness of geological time. 10,000 years from now, that fossil may have moved scarcely farther upward than the width of a finger. Human civilization, from the first cities beside rivers to the present moment, occupies only that same brief interval. Languages formed and vanished, kingdoms expanded and collapsed, entire religions spread across continents, all within a span of time so short that the rocks themselves would barely register it. Meanwhile, the bones of Mosasaurus remained sealed in darkness, untouched beneath layers of sediment deposited when North America was divided by water, and no human eye existed to witness the world above. They waited before our species emerged. They will continue waiting long after every living person now breathing has disappeared into history. The ocean those animals inhabited endured for tens of millions of years, reshaping coastlines, feeding immense ecosystems, and carrying generations of predators through warm currents beneath unfamiliar stars. None of the creatures moving through that sea understood the fragility of their age. They hunted because hunger drove them. They reproduced because life compels continuation. Around them, evolution unfolded silently, without intention or foresight, as natural and unexamined as the movement of tides. Then the world changed. Not morally, not symbolically, simply physically. Atmosphere, climate, chemistry, and sunlight shifted beyond the limits those ecosystems could survive. The rulers of that ocean vanished, leaving only mineral traces buried within stone. For millions of years afterward, no mind existed capable of understanding what had been lost. Now, at least briefly, one does. Human beings possess the unusual ability to touch a fossilized bone and recognize it as the remnant of an animal that lived 66 million years ago. We can reconstruct vanished coastlines from isotopes inside tooth enamel. We can stand before a skull recovered from ancient rock and imagine muscles, movement, behavior, and an entire surrounding ecosystem long absent from the Earth. Somewhere within that process exists a quiet emotional depth, unlike anything else in nature, a capacity to feel awe for lives separated from us by spans of time so immense they resist comprehension. Perhaps that is one of the gentlest consequences of consciousness. We inherit not only the present world, but awareness of worlds that came before it. And the ocean outside the modern shoreline, whether seen directly or imagined in darkness, is still connected to that ancient sea. The water has circulated through changing climates and drifting continents for hundreds of millions of years. The predators are different now. The ecosystems are quieter, leaner, less crowded with giants. Yet, beneath the waves, life continues the same patient experiment it began long before mosasaurs entered the water and long before humanity learned to name the fossils they left behind. The earth remains ancient beyond ordinary thought. The night above it remains deep and unending. And somewhere beneath the surface of the living sea, unseen currents still carry forward the long, continuous story of life, immense and indifferent, unfolding with or without witness.